In an article dated April 27, 2023, written by Tim Golden of ProPublica, headliner: Focus of 9/11 family's lawsuit against Saudi Arabia turns to a Saudi student who may have been a spy. 20 years after the September 11 attacks, declassified FBI documents have changed a big piece of the story about possible Saudi government help to the hijackers. Those documents are Operation Encore, and families of the victims want more information. From the first weeks after the 9/11 attacks, suspicions about a possible Saudi government role in the plot have focused on a mysterious 42-year-old graduate student who welcomed the first two Al-Qaida hijackers after they landed in Los Angeles LAX airport in January of 2000. The Saudi student, Omar al-Bayoumi, claimed to have met the two terrorists entirely by chance at the Mediterranean Cafe. He said he was just being hospitable when he helped them settle in San Diego. Both the FBI and the 9/11 Commission supported Bayoumi's account, dismissing the suspicions of agents who thought he might be a Saudi spy. Now, let me add to that. I read much of the Operation Encore files, and in those files, the FBI actually interviewed many members of the King Fahd Mosque, where Omar al-Bayoumi used to go to, headed by Fahad al-Thameri. They asked members of the mosque if they knew who Omar al-Bayoumi was, and they said yes. And they asked him, next question, has he ever done anything like this for other Arab foreigners who come into the country, like pay for their 2 months' rent and helping them get driver's licenses? They said no. So there's a lot of suspicion there. Let's get back to the article. After nearly 20 years, however, the FBI has changed its story. In documents declassified last year, the Bureau affirmed that Bayoumi was in fact an agent of the Saudi intelligence service who worked with Saudi religious officials and operated and reported to the kingdom's powerful ambassador in Washington. Now, the ambassador they're talking about is Muwahsid al-Jarrah, head of the Islamic Affairs Consular Office in the U.S. Saudi Consulate in Washington, D.C. Muwahsid al-Jarrah, no relation to Ziad Jarrah, actually got Omar al-Bayoumi and Fahad al-Thameri their positions. That's according to the Operation Encore files. Back to the article. Those revelations have now become a central point of contention in a long-running federal lawsuit in New York, where 9/11 survivors and relatives of the 2,977 people who were killed are seeking to hold the Saudi government responsible for the attacks. Lawyers for the families argued that the new evidence so contradicts its earlier Saudi claims that they should be allowed to seek new information from the country's intelligence service about Bayoumi and other officials who reportedly aided the hijacker, Fahad al-Thameri. The plaintiffs wrote in a motion this month, quote, Saudi Arabia has a duty to tell the truth about the intelligence roles of Bayoumi and Thameri based on its actual complete knowledge. Now, to add more insight, Fahad al-Thameri actually told a Tunisian cab driver, Khalid Benamreen, to pick up two Saudi brothers who were waiting at LAX airport, but he didn't tell them their names. Now, this is in the Pent Bomb investigation. It's also in the Operation Encore files. Khalid Benamreen picked up these two men, drove them to the King Fahd Mosque, and then dropped them off there, where they stood for 2 weeks. In fact, the 9/11 Commission, Dieter Snell, basically said that the 9/11 Commission had no idea where they stood for the next 2 weeks. Well, they stood with Fahad al-Thameri. That's because the 9/11 Commission was acting on orders of the State Department to protect the interests of Saudi Arabia. Back to the article. The federal magistrate who is managing discovery in the case, Sarah Netburn, has so far sided with the Saudis, finding no compelling reason to reopen the document search or order new interviews with Saudi officials. The family's lawyers have asked the judge overseeing the case, George B. Daniels, to overrule her. The Saudi government has always denied playing a role in the 9/11 attacks. A joint CIA-FBI report in 2005 concluded that there was no evidence that the Saudi government or royal family knowingly provided support for the 9/11 plot. It also claimed that there was no information that Bayoumi was a Saudi intelligence officer or that he wittingly aided the hijackers. Now, under the Operation Encore files, it basically does say that Omar al-Bayoumi basically worked for the Saudi Arabian Air Presidency, which is an arm of the Saudi government. Regardless of the impact that the Bayoumi information might have on the litigation, it has already rewritten an important part of the story about how the al-Qaeda plotters took their first incongruous steps in Southern California. The chief architect of the attacks, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, is said to have denied that the hijackers and any Confederates waiting for them in the United States. After being tortured by his CIA captors, Mohammed told them he instructed the first two hijackers to present themselves at local mosques as newly arrived students seeking help, the 9/11 Commission stated. Now, if the intelligence services like the CIA and the NSA were bugging bin Laden's satellite phone and the al-Qaeda communications hub in Sana'a, Yemen, that means if they were talking about the attacks on phone, would mean that they can manipulate the plot. So that the Saudi intelligence arm would be required to be informed by the CIA to follow these two men inside the United States because the CIA is not legally binded by law to conduct operations inside the United States. Now, that's a reasonable speculation. And according to the Operation Encore files, and now with the Canestraro document, that is now definitely the truth. That according to former FBI and CIA officials and congressional officials, the CIA did indeed run an illegal operation co-binding with Saudi intelligence on obtaining information pertaining to two al-Qaeda operatives who left a high-level al-Qaeda meeting in Malaysia and who have met with the co-conspirator or the alleged mastermind of the USS Cole bombing, which was being investigated by the FBI. And this is just another reason why the CIA did not tell the FBI about these two men entering the country, because it wouldn't be an information report. It would be a criminal investigation. That means the FBI would step in and arrest these two men. Back to the report. The two Saudis, Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi, were known to both Saudi intelligence and the CIA as al-Qaeda operatives. The CIA was watching as they joined an al-Qaeda planning meeting in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, in the first days of January 2000. It took place on January 5th and January 8th of 2000. But the agency said it lost track of the two when they flew to Bangkok and then to Los Angeles on January 15, 2000. Now, guess who didn't lose track of them? The NSA, the agency that nobody talks about. The CIA did not alert the FBI for more than a year after it learned the terrorists had entered the United States using their real names and Saudi passports. Now, you have to wonder why. Why didn't they inform the FBI? Did they not want the FBI to know that the CIA knew that much about them at that point, and that they both had dual U.S. visas, that they both met with the planner of the Cole bombing so that the FBI couldn't arrest these two men? That seems likely. Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi were both in their mid-20s, were notably ill-equipped to make their way in the West. They spoke almost no English and understood little about American culture. When they tried to take flight lessons in San Diego, their instructor quickly gave up on them because their language skills were so poor. And to replace them later was Hani Hanjour. For years after the attacks, FBI investigators were uncertain how the two hijackers spent their first 2 weeks in Los Angeles. Well, now they know. but later evidence suggests that they arrived almost immediately at the King Fahd Mosque in Culver City, Los Angeles, just down the street from Sony Pictures Studios. The White Marble Mosque was an anchor of a Saudi government network of religious operatives who propagated the kingdom's conservative Wahhabi faith around the United States. Some clerics and others in the network also worked with the Saudi intelligence service, reporting on Muslim communities and keeping an eye on dissident Saudi overseas. The FBI stated in a lengthy 2021 synthesis of reporting on Saudi connection that was declassified last year, quote, Saudi government officials and intelligence officers were directly operating and supporting the entities involved with this network, end quote. The FBI initial investigation of the 9/11 plot focused in part on Fahad al-Damari, a 32-year-old cleric who served the religious network as an imam at the King Fahd Mosque, while also credentialed as a mid-level diplomat at the nearby Saudi consulate. In 2007, the FBI began a follow-up inquiry, Operation Encore, which delved more deeply into the mosque's tie to the hijackers. One witness, vetted by both the FBI and CIA, told Encore investigators that Fahad al-Damari asked a trusted parishioner, Mohammed Johar, to house the two Saudis after they arrived in Los Angeles. The informant said Johar also told to take the hijackers to the small Halal Cafe, which was the Mediterranean restaurant, where they met Bayoumi on February 1st. In interviews with ProPublica, Johar minimized his help for the two men and denied that it came at Thumeri's request, which is pretty interesting because he is the name that is redacted in the Operation Encore's report. Although FBI witnesses suggested that Bayoumi received instructions at the consulate to go to the cafe, he claimed he just happened to stop there for lunch and introduced himself after he heard Al-Hazmi al-Midar speaking Gulf accented Arabic. Well, according to the Operation Encore files, that's not true, and neither is the Canestraro files, where they basically said that Bayoumi walked in and the two hijackers were there. Bayoumi said he suggested that his compatriots move to San Diego, which they did 3 days later. He arranged for them to rent an apartment in the building, set up a bank account for them, and briefly lent them $1,558 for their rent and security deposit. He also instructed them to various Muslim immigrants who helped them with tasks like setting up personal computers, starting English classes, and getting driver's licenses. Interesting. The FBI office in San Diego, suspicious of Bayoumi's ties to local Muslim extremists, had begun a preliminary investigation of his activities in 1998. Rather than attend graduate school, agents found Omar al-Bayoumi frequented local mosques, doling out money for various causes, and frequently videotaping visitors in an unsubtle way. He reportedly put up $400,000 to start a mosque in the San Diego suburb of El Cajon. Throughout this time in the United States, Bayoumi was paid a stipend and other expenses as a ghost employee of a Saudi contracting company called Dalla Avco, the FBI reported. Nonetheless, an FBI official, Jacqueline McGuire, testified to the 9/11 Commission in 2004 that Omar al-Bayoumi's initial meeting with the hijackers appeared to be a random encounter. The commission, which interviewed Bayoumi in Saudi Arabia, judged him a devout, outgoing man and accepted his denials that he was a spy. More than a decade later, Jacqueline McGuire repeated to a 9/11 review commission that al-Bayoumi's dealings with the hijackers appeared to be accidental. The Encore investigators strongly disagreed, but their small team was disbanded in 2016 by senior FBI officials in New York. I wonder where the pressure came from. A more definitive FBI report that was declassified last year validates the Encore's agents' suspicions. That document, dated June 14, 2017, states that from 1998 until the 9/11 attacks, Bayoumi was paid a monthly stipend as a co-optee of the Saudi General Intelligence Presidency, the GIP, via then Ambassador Prince Bandar bin Sultan Al Saud, also known as Bandar bin Sultan, the former U.S. Saudi ambassador to the United States under the Reagan, Bush, and Clinton administrations and Bush Jr. In the lexicon of intelligence gathering, a co-optee is generally a diplomat or other official who is recruited by their government spy service for a specific task on a mission, usually of lesser importance. The information that al-Bayoumi gathered on persons of interest in the Saudi community in Los Angeles and San Diego and other issues, which met certain GIP intelligence requirements, would be forwarded to Bandar bin Sultan, the FBI report says. Furthermore, the report also says that Bandar would then inform the GIP of items of interest to the GIP for further investigation, vetting, or even follow-up. The report also notes that, quote, allegations of Omar al-Bayoumi's involvement with Saudi intelligence were not confirmed at the time of the 9/11 Commission report. The above information does confirm these allegations, end quote. Another FBI report dated the following day cites recent source information as confirming Omar al-Bayoumi's work for Saudi intelligence services. Quote, we could see a block away that Omar al-Bayoumi was an intelligence guy, the lead agent on the Encore team said, Daniel Gonzalez. It's evident now that he was tasked with helping the hijackers, that he was running a clandestine operation. So who was running it? End quote. The FBI documents do not clearly answer that question, but they add detail to an existing picture of calls and meetings around Omar al-Bayoumi, Fahad al-Mary, and members of the Saudi government's religious network around the time of the hijackers' arrival in California. Just before meeting with the hijackers, al-Bayoumi met at the Saudi consulate with an official who worked with al-Mary, one witness told the FBI. At the meeting, Nawaf al-Hazmi and Khalid al-Midar, the source told investigators that Omar al-Bayoumi met with Fahad al-Mary at the King Fahd Mosque. Thumari had denied that he helped the hijackers to the 9/11 Commission. Several days later, as al-Bayoumi was setting up the hijackers' bank accounts in San Diego, telephone records gathered by the FBI show that he called Fahad al-Mary, one in a series of calls between the two men, and around the same time, al-Bayoumi also called a Yemeni American imam in San Diego. He was Anwar al-Awlaki, who would later emerge as a leader of al-Qaida in the Arabian Peninsula. Although it was known that al-Awlaki had contact with the hijackers in San Diego, he was still viewed as a Muslim moderate for several years after the 9/11 attacks. But newer FBI documents suggested al-Awlaki might have played a more significant role in working with al-Bayoumi to help al-Hazmi and al-Midar. Al-Awlaki was killed in Yemen in 2011 by a drone strike ordered by President Barack Obama, even though al-Awlaki himself is an American citizen. Shortly thereafter, his son, Abdur Rahman al-Awlaki, was also killed at a restaurant by a drone strike. And oh, by the way, so were 6 other people that were seated nearby him. Several of the more recently declassified FBI documents, including the 2021 synthesis, also shed new light on the relationships of al-Bayoumi and al-Mary with key figures in the Saudi religious network that operated in the United States. Between January and May of 2000, the report notes that 2 cell phones associated with al-Bayoumi registered 24 calls to the Saudi consulate, 32 to the embassy in Washington, and 37 to the Saudi Cultural Mission in Virginia. Bayoumi made a series of calls right before and after the hijackers arrived in San Diego to Mutawib al-Sudairi, a Saudi cleric who had visited him in California months earlier. Sudairi, who normally worked as an administrative officer at the Saudi embassy in Washington, lived for several months in Missouri with a Palestinian-American man who reportedly procured satellite phones and other equipment for Osama bin Laden. Sudairi was also linked to suspected al-Qaeda representatives and operatives in Saudi Arabia, the report says. Sudairi was also tasked by his handler, Muassed al-Jarrah, to watch over al-Bayoumi in San Diego. Both al-Bayoumi and al-Thumeri were also reportedly in touch with Muassed Ahmed al-Jarrah, a key figure in the Saudi religious network who was a senior figure in the Islamic affairs sections of the Washington Embassy, FBI documents indicate. Now, just to add, al-Jarrah also has connections with Islamic fundamentalists inside the United States. Now, this is a big problem because according to the FBI, Muassed al-Jarrah is currently one of the leaders of the Islamic Affairs Committee in Washington, D.C. Now, who does he know in Washington, D.C.? Well, according to the FBI report, al-Jarrah may be trying to bring other Saudi Sunni Salafi extremists in the United States through his position at the Islamic Affairs mission in Washington, D.C. Al-Jarrah's official responsibilities are to manage and control all assignments of Saudi imams, clerics, in the United States and facilitate the issuance of diplomatic visas to these individuals. And what Muassed al-Jarrah would do is basically give people like Fahd al-Thumeri visas and other imams that were tasked in these Wahhabi schools that were spreading in the United States, and al-Jarrah would oversee it. Now, I know he's not acting alone. Now, who is his handler? It's probably the Saudi government, but we can't prove it. Saudi imams who are assigned to the United States through this process report to al-Jarrah, and he serves as the coordinator of all their activity while they're inside the United States. Now, according to the FBI, al-Jarrah is purposely selecting Saudi Salafi extremists to be assigned inside the United States. And al-Jarrah travels in and around the United States visiting the Saudi imams who are under his control. And the FBI said it should be noted that al-Jarrah is listed as an accountant for the EKSA on the U.S. Department of State's diplomats list. Now, one can safely assume that Muassed al-Jarrah has contacts in Washington, D.C., especially in Congress. But who exactly? Well, probably they are protected. Back to the article. At the Washington Embassy, al-Jarrah also acted as a senior officer of the Saudi intelligence service. He was a close aide to the longtime ambassador Bandar bin Sultan. Well, there you go. And worked for Bandar again after he returned to the kingdom to lead the National Security Council. Well, how about that? Jarrah was forced by the FBI to leave the United States because of his suspected extremist ties, in which I read from the report. Neither a spokesman for the Saudi embassy nor lawyers for the Saudi government responded to questions about the FBI documents' assertions about the roles of al-Bayoumi, Mu'attib al-Sudari, Jarrah, and Bandar. Of course not, because that would then further implicate that they had something to do with 9/11, like aiding and abetting the hijackers that were involved. While the al-Bayoumi revelations others might be embarrassing for the Saudi kingdom, it remains unclear why successive U.S. administrations kept so much of the 9/11 investigation secret for so long. Let me think. I think I know. Because oil is thicker than blood. Because our government is just as guilty as the Saudi government when it comes to making a cover for our allies who are acting as intelligence service arms inside the United States and running their own operations. Why didn't they hand over what they collected in the years 99 and 2000 while they were inside the United States regarding about al-Qaida, who were later involved with the 9/11 attacks? Because we deported them all. That's why. Back to the article. Some of those documents were later released under an order that President Joe Biden signed in September 2021, days before the 20th anniversary of the attacks, with some records being sought by the 9/11 plaintiffs still being withheld, including call logs from a cell phone that al-Bayoumi is believed to have lent to visiting Saudi operatives. In response to questions about the 2021 report and the al-Bayoumi disclosures, the FBI said in an email that it had nothing to add about the documents released through the executive order process. Of course, they're not going to expand further because that would mean that they were involved with the cover-up. Now, the question is probably who told them to do that? That's probably the State Department. Although the Saudi intelligence services and the kingdom's religious network sometimes worked in concert, they had distinct agendas. The religious network sometimes acted independently or even at cross purposes with the government. Given the abiding mystery over how the CIA lost track of al-Hazmi and al-Midar in Malaysia, some former FBI investigators have speculated al-Bayoumi might have been asked to approach the hijackers as part of a U.S. or Saudi intelligence operation to recruit them. At the time, former officials have said the CIA was desperately trying to develop sources inside al-Qaida. The CIA has long denied that it allowed the hijackers to come in the U.S. as part of a failed recruitment effort. That theory gained some currency with statements by a former White House counterterrorism coordinator, Richard Clarke, that it was a plausible explanation for the CIA's failure to track the first two hijackers and its long refusal to alert the FBI to their presence in the United States. Well, I could think of another reason, but it'd be much more nefarious and harder to prove, that the CIA knew about the operation and they wanted it to transpire so that they could benefit from the attacks. Well, you must say, next question, how did they benefit? Well, they benefited by having their war powers under the president expanded, that the torture and rendition program, which was headed by the CIA, expanded, that the funding for the CIA was given a blank check, that they needed more resources, which is the reason why when they complained to the 9/11 Commission that they could have stopped the attacks if they just had more help, well, guess what happened? They did indeed get their budget expanded. But such a theory does not explain the CIA's apparent lack of attention to al-Hazmi and al-Midar's whereabouts or al-Bayoumi's sometimes disinterested relationship with them. Whether the answer to such questions might emerge from the federal lawsuit remains to be seen. Netburn, the magistrate, had notified the plaintiffs that she would only reopen discovery in the case if there were extraordinary circumstances. So far, she has not been persuaded that the new information about al-Bayoumi's work for the Saudi intelligence agency meets the standard. Of course not, because the pressure is just too great to not investigate how the Saudi intelligence services were actually in concert with the domestic agencies of the United States in running an illegal operation that was monitoring al-Qaida operatives inside the country, even though that they just came from a high-level al-Qaida summit meeting in Malaysia. Bayoumi al-Thumairy aided the hijackers on behalf of the kingdom was always denied by the Saudi government. They dismissed the plaintiffs' appeals to reopen discovery as more of the same. Starting in the fall, the court will also hear arguments on a motion by the Saudi government to dismiss the case. It's clear from the evidence that Saudi intelligence was at the center of the network that aided the hijackers as they prepared for the attacks that killed my father, said Peter Brady, the son of a finance executive, Michael Jacobs, who died in the World Trade Center. We urge the courts to allow further inquiry. Our families and the American public deserve answers and accountability. With the latest revelations of the Canestraro files, the earlier revelations of Operation Encore, we have more than enough to assert the following: that the CIA and the Saudi intelligence services, the General Intelligence Directorate, were often working in concert in trying to obtain information about two al-Qaida operatives that were known to them, that they weren't shared with the FBI or the State Department, and trying to collect information about these two men in the hopes of either turning them or that they knew about the plot and wanted the plot to be successful. And this has got to be the only reasons why they didn't tell the FBI or the State Department about their arrival inside the United States. And as long as the CIA and as long as the FBI afterwards continued to lie to the public about their involvement in facilitating or covering up after the fact regarding these 9/11 operatives inside the United States really grinds my gears, because as long as irrelevants like Alex Jones and Jake Paul are trending, we should be seeing the most important revelations under the Cannistrail files trending 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, because of the really strong evidence that shows that the CIA was running an illegal intelligence operation inside the United States, and with it, the Saudi intelligence GID. That's the end of the video for today. I'm Adam Fitzgerald. See you in the next video.